The missing virtue. Angels came to the Lord and reported there was a young man who sought to do good, who loved his wife and treated her with great affection. Not only that, when the man and his wife spoke, they shared such joy and kindness, such light and truth between them. The angels were coming to listen in to their daily discourse. The Lord said he would come and see the man and his wife for himself. So it was that the Lord came down and looked upon the young man and his wife. He found them together, preparing a meal for their children, joking about the events of the day. Their conversation was witty, filled with mirth and insight, and great love was shared between them. The Lord then considered the young man carefully. He spoke to the angels and said, "We will present this matter to the council, and you will receive word." The Lord returned from where he came and presented the matter to the council to consider. The Lord said, "I've considered the case of this young man, and have found his intent and desires to be perfect. He has labored long to gain light, and has collected great light. However, he is lacking in one great virtue, and it will be necessary for us to intervene if the young man is to be prepared to become one with us. He is complete, having a wife whom he loves and who loves him. They are as one of us, and their company would be well suited to mingle with our company." Because of the Lord's recommendation, the council determined to intervene, to preserve the young man and his wife. The Lord was to do all he saw fit to cause the preservation of this man and woman. So it was that the Lord called his servant and instructed him what he should do. Thereupon the events unfolded in the life of the young man as follows. One day, as the young man was leaving a courthouse in Salt Lake City, he was approached by a very young beggar. The beggar asked him for money so that he might buy food. The young man said he had no money with him, which was true. However, the young man did have money in his car, which he did not offer to give. As he walked away, the young man thought upon the beggar, and was troubled that he gave nothing to him. The poor man seemed to be honest, even pure, though his clothing appeared tattered and worn. The contrast between the purity of the young beggar's face and the apparent decay of his clothing seemed odd. The young man determined he would return from his car and give to the beggar. When he returned, the beggar was gone, though the young man searched the area, then the block, then drove about for blocks searching. The beggar could not be found. The young man returned to his office. That evening, as the young man was thinking of the beggar, he recalled the beggar's face. He wondered if he was able to satisfy his needs. For many months the young man would think of the beggar. He found himself reflecting on the petition for aid and how he refused. He regretted not bringing the beggar with him to his car, and thought it was wrong to refuse one in need. Some years later, the young man taught a lesson from the Book of Mormon, in which the sermon of King Benjamin was discussed. As teacher, he asked, "How seriously should we take King Benjamin's instruction to give relief to the beggars?" The class responded with comments that beggars should not be encouraged. "Most will use the money you give them to buy alcohol," said one. "They're violating the law," said another. The class thought the words of King Benjamin may have worked in a primitive society, but in modern societies, the government takes care of welfare needs. People could not be expected to tolerate beggars in their communities, and certainly not make them welcome by almsgiving. The young man thought the class was harsh and wondered out loud whether they were wrong. One of the class jeered, "You're a witless liberal." The young man pondered on the lesson and remembered the young face of the beggar outside the courthouse years before. He grew in the conviction that King Benjamin was not talking to another people in another time, but was telling us what we ought to do with the unfortunate among us. But he did nothing with this reflection. It was some years later when the man, no longer young, taught a lesson on the book of Hebrews. As he taught he came across Paul's admonition to not be forgetful to entertain strangers, because sometimes strangers were really unrecognized angels. The man asked the class, "How seriously should we take the suggestion that sometimes angels come among us in disguise. The class responded with comments that such things were really allegory. Good people or children are what is meant, said one. Angels do not come and walk about the streets. The idea is preposterous, said another. The class thought the words were written to a primitive, even superstitious society, but modern societies cannot expect angels to be on the loose. But the man thought the class was faithless and wondered out loud whether they were wrong. One of the class jeered, "You're a gullible simpleton." The man pondered on the lesson and remembered again the face of the very young beggar outside the courthouse many years before. He grew in the conviction that Paul knew what he was talking about, and that angels visited all people in all times, even when they were faithless. He wondered if the beggar with the innocent face had been an angel after all. The man believed this had been an angel. He determined to never permit a beggar to put up a petition to him for help without responding to give aid. So it was that for years the man took deliberate effort to give aid to those who begged. Oftentimes, as he went into the temple in Salt Lake, there were beggars on the sidewalk outside the gates. He never failed to give money to all those who were there. On many occasions, those entering the temple with him would reprove him for encouraging beggars to remain outside the temple gates. They thought this a foolish thing to do. He did not defend his acts, but thought to himself that a great crowd of beggars receiving relief outside the temple gates would be a great tribute to the charity of those who entered in. Perhaps no greater tribute could be made, he thought. But in all this the man was still not right. He had gained some understanding, but still lacked the virtue he needed. Then it happened. It was a rainy day when the man was in a hurry. He parked on the side street of the office building he intended to enter. He rushed from his car around the corner of the block and into the building. Some hours later, he left and returned to his car. As he rounded the corner, however, this time he saw a beggar sitting across the street beneath an awning. The man was not going that way, and he wondered if he ought to cross the street and give money to the beggar. The beggar was not petitioning him. He was not in the way he was traveling. He would have to cross the street, go out of his way to provide money to this beggar. He thought about how he had for some years given money to all who asked, but now there was a man who was not asking for money. He reflected on what he should do. He sat in his car, sheltered from the rain, and pondered. He remembered the face of the beggar outside the courthouse many years before. He wondered if he failed to give help this day in the rain, if he would not again regret for years the failure to do so. He determined not to make that choice again. The man walked to the corner, waited in the rain for the light to change, and when it did, he hurried across the street and went to the beggar, who sat with his eyes downcast. The beggar had an open guitar case for people to drop money into, but had no guitar. The case was nearly empty except for less than $50 in change. He had a sign in his hand asking for help. The beggar was African American, which was unusual in Salt Lake City. He was shabbily dressed and somewhat wet despite the store awning under which he sat. As the man put money into the guitar case, he spoke to the beggar. "I suppose it's good we're having rain. We ought to be grateful, but I'd just as soon see the sun." The beggar looked up and smiled. As the man turned to leave, he noticed the traffic light had changed and did not hurry to leave. When the beggar saw he stood there, he spoke up and thanked the man for his kindness. Then the two of them, the beggar and the man, spoke with one another for some moments while the light changed and changed again. As the two conversed, the man reflected on how the beggar's countenance seemed to light up as they talked. He noticed, too, that they spoke people. He noticed, too, and as they spoke, people seemed to now notice the beggar and to be dropping money into the guitar case. Before it was nearly empty. Now there were many dollars being dropped into the case. The man wondered at the change. The black beggar was from St. Louis and had only been in Salt Lake for 2 days. He had hoped to return to St. Louis, but needed money for the trip. He had no wife and had never been married. He did not play the guitar, but could play the harmonica. However, his harmonica had been lost last month, and he hadn't replaced it as yet. His name was John. The conversation was not strained, and the man did not doubt that if John were his neighbor, they would be great friends. He wished John could be part of his life, but realized it could not happen. The man parted from his friend, the beggar named John, and when the light changed for the 7th time, though they were never to meet again, they would remain friends. Friends change each other. This day, John and the man had each changed. As he returned to his office, he reflected on the difference in the money given to John from before his donation and after. He concluded, however, that it was not his donation which mattered. It was the notice he had given to the beggar. No one paid any attention to John sitting under the awning until he had stopped to talk with him. Then people could see the humanity of the beggar. Before, John was just an object, but when a man dressed in a suit stopped to talk to him, he transformed from an object on the sidewalk into a human. He reflected, too, on how John had seemed more grateful for being spoken with, for a friendly notice, than he had been for money. As it seemed to the man that he had gotten more from giving money to John than the money given away, he wondered if, all along, the money given away was not the best spent money in his lifetime, for he realized all those to whom he had given money were just as much to be loved as John. A regional conference was held, and an evening priesthood leadership meeting was set for the conference center in downtown Salt Lake City. The man came to the meeting, but it was crowded with traffic and he could not park near the conference center. He left his car in a lot blocks away and walked to the meeting. The sidewalks were crowded with many men, dressed in suits, walking in the same direction towards the meeting. When he arrived at the corner of South Temple, a crowd waited for the light to change. The man moved along the eastern edge of the crowd till he came to the sidewalk on South Temple Street, then skirted along the outside until he could approach the curb. As he emerged from the side of the crowd, the man nearly bumped into an elderly woman standing on the curb, holding a sign asking for help. The old woman did not as much lift up her face, but stared at the ground for her shame in begging. No one was giving her any aid from the great crowd of men wearing suits. As was his practice, the man had money in his pocket to give to beggars. Since he had encountered but this one beggar, he gave to her more generously by reaching for her hand and putting money into it. At the kindness shown her, the old woman glanced up and said, "Thank you so much." The man responded, "God bless you," and he meant it. The crowd moved, and the man went into the great conference center. There were talks given by church authorities, and all who came were suitably entertained. The speakers' faces were projected onto great screens on the walls on either side of the conference center, greatly magnified to heroic proportions. Overhead lighting dimmed while spotlights shone on those who spoke, or prayed, or sang, making them shimmer in the artificial light. It was a wondrous visual spectacle designed to cause awe for the beholders. When the meeting ended, they all left as they had come. The man looked but did not see the elderly woman, nor any other beggar as he left that evening. In the middle of the night, the man was awakened and summoned by the Spirit. He was taken by the Spirit back to the place where he had been earlier that day, and stood now before the old beggar woman on a deserted street. As he stood before her, she was transformed before his eyes, from an elderly beggar woman to a beautiful young personage whom he recognized as Sarah, wife of Abraham and mother of all the righteous. When he saw who she was, he wondered at what this all meant. Sarah spoke to him and said, "You passed the test." The man, thinking she spoke of his giving her some money, said, "It wasn't much of a test." She responded, "But no one else had mercy." And as he thought about all those who had been beside him in the crowd, none of whom had even noticed her, he was taken by the Spirit back to his own bed. He awoke his wife and told her what had happened. She inquired, "What test?" "I do not know," he replied. What do you think it means?" "I think it means you're quite full of yourself," she replied. They both chuckled and returned to sleep. In the morning, as he awoke, the Spirit commanded the man to write the account. As he sat down to write, the words were given to him. Where he intended to write about the events of the day before, instead it was given to him to write the following: "I have been instructed from on high, and have been taught for years. 18 years ago I failed the test. Today I have passed. I was confronted by 2 beggars. With the first I was going out, with the second I was coming in. The first was young, the second was old. The first was a man, the second a woman. The first was outside a courthouse, the second outside a church. To the first I did not have charity, but to the second I did. In the first I did not know the identity of the beggar, but in the second I knew her name. The first left me with lingering guilt, which I have carried until the second left a sense of relief. God's patience in bearing with me has given me 18 years to learn the great lesson. It has all been punctuated, as if by 2 great bookends, in these visits by his angels, and God has been doing there all along." The man had learned the missing virtue. Within days the Lord came to him, instructed him further. The Lord dressed him in white and gave him further light and knowledge to prepare him. When he had been fully prepared by the Lord, he was summoned into the heavenly council, where he heard unspeakable things. Circles within circles were assembled, the Father being in the center of it all. The great rejoicing took place. The words of Psalm 2, verse 7 were spoken unto him. He met the hosts of heaven, and they were as family unto him. He returned to his wife and made all things known to her, and they rejoiced together at the things they were promised, and waited upon the Lord for their time to come, when they might leave this earth and join the choir above and be one with them. But the world did not know them. Now this happened because the Lord determined to preserve the young man and his wife. Whatever the Lord takes in his mind to do, he will do, for the Lord is God.